Thank you all for being here. My name is Sierra Kaler Jones, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of Rethinking Schools, and I'm joined by my friend, Rethinking Schools editor, Jesse Hagopian, to be in conversation with two of the authors and one of the co-editors of Rethinking Schools' newest book, Transgender Justice in Schools, co-edited by Linda Christensen and Ty Marshall. Rethinking Schools produced the forthcoming book, Transgender Justice in Schools, as an act of defiance and solidarity. While lawmakers attempt to delete queer people and people of color, their histories, and literature from the curriculum and libraries, deny them access to healthcare and bathrooms, we resist. We refuse to accept unjust laws. And we encourage others, we encourage all of you to resist with us as well. We must fight alongside students and teachers who have the courage to come out and take up space and demand that their chosen names be spoken with the reverence due their rebirth. We must build safe and welcoming harbors within educational spaces. And then although we do this work, especially for transgender and non-binary students and teachers, we do this for all of us. We want our schools to nurture better human beings by valuing the children's voices and encouraging their sense of self. We want schools to reflect the values of justice we hope will characterize every corner of our society. I wanted to share that snippet of the introduction of the book, as well as you'll see it in our Transgender Justice in Schools spring issue. And we're grateful to the book's co-editors, Linda Christensen and Ty Marshall, for bringing this beautiful, powerful, moving book to life. With that, I'll pass it over to Jesse to do some introductions, and then we will dive into conversation.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Sierra. It is really an honor to be in this conversation this afternoon. I'm Jesse Hagopian, an editor with Rethinking Schools, he, him pronouns. And tonight we are joined by ASL interpreters Christina Miranda and Nikki Macias. We are grateful to both of them for being in community with us today. Thank you for making this event accessible. And I want everyone to join me in welcoming our panelists this evening. We are so fortunate to be with Ty Marshall, he, they pronouns, an eighth year teacher currently teaching social studies at McDaniel High School and English language development with Portland Dart Schools. Ty is the co-editor of Transgender Justice in Schools, our brand new book. So exciting. Ty, great work. Thank you for that. And we are also joined by Maximilian Matthews, who uses all gender pronouns respectfully, and is a Black non-binary queer writer based out of Durham, North Carolina, and currently studying mental health counseling at North Carolina A&T State University. And as well, Maximilian's work has also been featured on Blavity, Afropunk, The Body is Not an Apology, Race Baiter, Inside Higher Ed, and the News and Observer. Maximilian has worked in higher education administration for over 10 years and is the author of Another World. And we are also honored to be joined by Sam Long, he, him pronouns, Chinese American Canadian transgender man and a high school science teacher in Denver, Colorado. He is the co-founder of genderinclusivebiology.com. Welcome you all. Thanks so much for being in conversation with us. It's such a crucial time for this conversation, and it has just been heartbreaking to see all the attacks across the country on our transgender students and educators and books. And so I wanted to begin by asking you all, what does transgender justice in schools look like for you? And maybe we'll start with Ty and then Sam and then Maximilian.
Thanks, you all. I'm feeling like so honored and sort of starstruck with my co-panelists here. So just appreciating y'all. I mean, I think first and foremost, transgender justice in schools is survival of trans people, especially in this climate, right? Like being living, joyful, visible teachers and students. I was listening to a podcast interview with Laverne Cox, and she just kind of reminds us that we're in this backlash that you're talking about, both of you, Sierra and Jesse. Like we're trying to shift from like we're talking about hormones and we're talking about surgery and we're talking about bodies to like we're talking about humanity, and so just kind of keeping that at the center. I think to just lift up some of what I've gotten to see as editing this book, like that our lives are worthy of study. And Sam will talk more about all of the brilliant, like gender expansive curriculum. Yeah, I guess that that in schools, what transgender justice means is more expansiveness and more freedom for everybody.
Right on.
Hi, it's Sam. Thanks, Ty. And I want to add on to your thoughts. First about survival. Traditionally, schools are some of the most gendered places, or at least to me, some of the most gendered places that I can think of and have experienced. And so the task of surviving is important for trans people going to school and working in schools. Um, to me, transgender justice, and I think I'm starting to see some of this already. It means that everybody in the school community caring about trans issues and acknowledging that trans people are a part of our community and wanting to see them and understand our experiences. I think when I first started teaching, trans issues they were so not talked about that it almost wasn't a worry for me, and nobody had heard any bad things even about trans people, most of my students. And so where we're at now, it's about embracing the visibility that we've been ushered into, but giving ourselves time to put our needs first when we need that.
Right on. Thank you.
It's Maximilian. For me, transgender justice looks like talking directly to trans folks and hearing what they need and doing what we can to provide those needs or making the effort certainly to do so. I think the Transgender Justice in Schools book does a great job of giving us strategies and methods and things that we can apply in the work that we do every day to make this happen. I also think transgender justice looks like um, advocating for policies and procedures, that help trans students not just to survive, but to thrive. And I love, Ty, what you said about humanity being at the core. I think when we operate from that standpoint, we can really use that um, when we try to apply what transgender justice looks like in schools, because it's going to look different, right? Based on the school, based on the location, based on the administration, it's going to look different for each of us. And it's also going to look different based on our students, right? And so, one of the things I love about the book is that, we hear directly from trans students about what they want to see and what they need and what that justice looks like for them. And so I think it can start with just a simple conversation with the trans student and really understanding what they need, again, not to survive, but to thrive in their school.
Yes.
Yes, this is Sierra. That was so beautiful. And I love that you all are talking about and highlighting humanity and these very human aspects, both in the curriculum and policy, and how we create a much more beautiful, more loving classroom and community spaces for trans young people, for trans educators to be able to, like Maximilian said, not just survive, but to thrive and to feel celebrated and loved. And so I'm interested to hear from you all about where do you see the intersections between racial justice and transgender justice? As we know, intersectionality is so crucial. And Maximilian, you talked about this, is that it's also very contextual when we're talking about transgender justice and looking at our classroom, looking at our students, looking at our community. And intersectionality is a crucial piece of that. So Sam, I'll turn to you first, and then Maximilian, and then Ty. Would love to hear your thoughts, the intersections of racial justice and transgender justice.
Thanks, Sierra. This is Sam. And a lot of the time that I was teaching in my first year or two, I felt like I needed to focus so much on what it means to be transgender, because I did choose to share that part of my identity with my students from the first year. And that was such an emotional load that I wasn't really thinking about or sharing anything about my racial identity. And as it happened, I found myself in Denver, a community that I didn't grow up in, didn't really know the students. I felt like, well, maybe in order to connect with the students, I need to show that I have the same experiences as them, which I couldn't because I grew up in Canada and am Chinese American, Canadian. But in the end, I realized that I needed to show, uh, I didn't need to show that I had the same experiences as them, but that I wanted to learn about them and I wanted to find things that we could relate to. So a big thing that I talked to my students a lot about in the first year was what it's like to come out as trans to your family, and in general, what it's like to tell your family who you are when you may come from a family that's very community oriented, doesn't really focus that much on the individual. What was that experience like? And so in that way, I think I was able to connect culturally to some of my students. And also, I'm thinking about in science, race and gender are two topics that um, exists in living things, but many science teachers are not eager to discuss them or concerned about discussing them because they might be controversial. But also, students want to know about these things because they affect all of our lives. And so, in becoming sort of the first teacher to teach about gender in science, it also allowed me to um, see students' interests in learning about race as well. And both of those kind of converged in our science classes, looking at human identities alongside every other aspect of humanity that we learn about in biology. I think a lot of people worry that um, in biology, we can only teach about kind of physical traits because identity is something separate. But I've found that students want to make a connection between um, their racial identity and perhaps genetics, or their gender identity and variations in gender that we see in biology. And so to me, those are two aspects of living things, humans, that are that could be part of biology and could be how we show students that science is relevant to everybody. And so I've been thinking more about how to incorporate that into my instruction and how to make available resources for others to do this.
Ms. Maximilian. Um, I love, Sam, how you talked about incorporating that into your instruction. I love how you write about that in your article in the book, your two articles in the book, rather. Um, but I think to piggyback off of that, I think racial justice and transgender justice looks like what you just talked about, incorporating that into the instruction, into the curriculum, that students are learning. I'm thinking about the person that's on Jesse's shirt, Marsha P. Johnson, and how we can incorporate that into history lessons, right? When I was growing up, I desperately wanted to learn about other queer people like me, but I didn't have that, opportunity, which I write about in the book. And so I think racial justice and transgender justice, you can't have one without the other. We can't talk about transgender justice without talking about racial justice and vice versa. And I think Marsha P. Johnson's work is a great example of that. When you think about the work that she did with Sylvia Rivera, we could really look to history to learn uh, how to merge the two, and how to really apply and incorporate racial and transgender justice in schools. So um, that's what I think about when I think about racial justice and transgender justice, and also intersectionality, which you talked about, Sierra, and learning how we can incorporate that into our curriculum.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. Learning so much already. Really appreciate what everyone said. This is Jesse again, and uh, seeing the ways that school districts and states are trying to police people's bodies, police transgender bodies, has really been horrific in the last few years. Trying to ban students from being able to participate in sports, trying to uh, ban students from using the pronouns they want to use. It's really hurt my heart. And so I'm hoping you all can talk more about stories, experiences that illuminate hope and possibility, or this movement towards transgender justice. Oh, and actually before we get to that, let's have Ty do Ty, sorry, I want to hear your response first on intersectionality.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I mean, thanks this is Ty. Thanks to Sam really talking about where we are bringing ourselves into curriculum, and Maximilian, like that beautiful nod to, I like looking at history. Intersectionality is so obvious, right? All the Black trans leaders that have pushed transgender justice from the beginning. And I think, sometimes as a white, queer, and trans person, sometimes I think that in my work in justice, right, there can be a tendency for white folks who are trans to put the gender stuff before the race stuff as a little bit of a dance at times. Like, I hold this marginalization, so I don't have to hold this accountability around race. And I have struggled with that in my own journey for sure. And I think I try to kind of hold that in my body in those relationships with students, right? Where can, as they're reading me, where can we talk about what assumptions are you getting off my body, and what assumptions or what feelings of belonging have you had or not had as you walk through the world? So really trying to keep it in our personal experience so that I can be as honest as possible and as thoughtful and as I'm trying to think of the right word, just willing to make mistakes, right? And willing to name things. I think the power of what gets named and doesn't get named around race in classrooms and gender is really, really powerful. So if I can create a space where I'm showing that humility, then my students are able to like kind of bring in their power as well. I mean, big picture, I think of so many things. I think of like, I had some mentors early in my like political organizing in the disability justice work, like Patty Byrne from Sins Invalid, really always reminding me that anytime we're talking about bodies and bodies being bad or bodies being criminalized, we're talking about eugenics and we're talking about slavery. And so just kind of holding that connection in this moment when we're debating which bodies are allowed where, and you know, the connection to reproductive justice, obviously, around who's allowed to legislate what about whose body. You know, I was just visiting my very conservative family on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and it was wild to see this unexpected allyship, right, around what the state should or shouldn't do with people's bodies. So yeah. I think that the other piece I wanted to just lift up around sort of like whiteness and transness as we're trying to fight for racial justice is a piece in the book. And McMacken-Marsh talks about like wanting to hold multiple truths and how she does that in her classroom as a white queer person, and just, you know, encouraging other white educators to be kind of holding that juggling act.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, that was such a vital contribution. I'm so glad that you shared that. So now we want to get to the question about where you all find hope. You know, there's such a challenging time for this organizing, but there's incredible work being done to push back and to build an intersectional movement for trans justice. And so I'm hoping you all can talk more about that. And we'll go Maximilian and then Ty and then Sam.
It's Maximilian. So here in Durham, there's an organization that is youth-led. It's called the Youth Justice Project, and they're doing work to remove school resource officers from Durham Public Schools, and that gives me a lot of hope. You know, when we think about um, movements as far as social justice, they have been led by young people. And so it really motivates me to see them pushing for this and fighting for this, even with so much resistance. Because what's interesting about Durham is that it's a liberal area, it's a progressive area. But even in the book, there are stories about how we still experience this resistance and this opposition, you know, in liberal and progressive areas, right? And so just because a trans student is in, you know, an area like that doesn't necessarily equate to them thriving, like we talked about earlier. And so when I think about the Youth Justice Project, that gives me hope. There's another organization here that I've been involved with called Rainbow Collective for Change. We've done a lot of organizing around policies being incorporated into Durham Public Schools and trainings and just educating administrators and staff about queer and trans issues. And so that gives me hope to see people show up to school board meetings. It gives me hope seeing all the people on this call. You know, it gives me hope reading all the stories that are, you know, in the book. You know, that gives me a lot of hope. And I think we really have to latch on to that because I think community is one of the things that's going to save us, if you will. So as long as we keep building that community and pouring into it, we can build from there.
Thank you, Maximilian. This is Ty. I love what you were saying about, yeah, sort of liberal areas and the assumptions that come with that. I think one of the examples that gives me hope coming from Portland, very liberal area, is like when those ideas kind of push up against receive backlash, like here in Newburgh, Oregon, which is a suburb of Portland, there was a school board fight that came about because the Newburgh School Board in 2021 banned both pride flags and BLM, Black Lives Matter flags, and speaking of intersections, and the fight back against that was really supported by a lot of community organizations. And it's just one of those examples of like where people can feel power over, or with, I should say, schools. And those fights are happening around the country, as we know. And groups like Showing Up for Racial Justice have done some school board campaigns and trying to really push back in that arena. And I would just say that searching for this piece of resistance has felt really, really important. In editing this book, Linda and I talked about this, and she's got a great curriculum example in chapter 3 about that. But one of the pieces that didn't make it into the book that I keep holding on to in a interview from Movement Memos was this example of in Texas, the DHS workers sort of refusing to comply with and refusing to enforce the policies around charging abuse if parents were providing gender-affirming care to their kids. And apparently like 2,300 DHS workers all quit as a way to say like, no, we will not do this. So just, for me, like those labor examples, something to kind of hold on to and organize around, have been really powerful too.
Hi, this is Sam. Great to hear your stories, Maximilian and Ty. I've been able to experience and be a part of, in the last couple of years, some pretty uplifting changes. It used to be that I was the only teacher in any school that I was at to teach about gender and science, and gender, sex, and sexuality. But last year, I led a professional learning course that was year-long and involved other middle and high school science teachers in my district, teachers who are not transgender, but spent a year looking through their lessons and auditing the way that they were discussing families and bodies and genes and behaviors, and working with each other to make updates and try something new. This could be something that teachers haven't changed the way they teach about it in a while, and they might not have thought of there's any reason that it needs to change, but mostly they wanted to do this because they had heard from their students and learned about their students' identities, or learned that there's a little more complexity in, let's say, sex chromosomes that they haven't been covering, and perhaps they should. There's also been the beginning of a research study from a trans science education researcher named Charlie Blake, who when this study is complete, we're going to have some peer-reviewed and actionable data on how teaching affects students' views about gender and gender essentialism. And so we'll be able to see how the way that students are taught in a class such as science, in this case, affects their entire outlook on gender in society. So I'm excited for the advancement of those projects and science in particular. It gives me hope to think that I'm not always going to be the only teacher doing this, and I know I'm not the only one that's a part of this community and that wants to see science represent trans people.
This is Sierra. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to these glimpses of possibility, these glimpses of hope, these glimpses of community. And Sam, I'm just appreciating what you shared with us about how powerful it is to just know that you aren't alone and that there is a community of educators that is committed to transgender justice inside and outside of schools. And speaking of that, my next question is, what advice do you have for teachers who want to work for transgender justice in their classroom or school, but they just don't know where to begin? They don't know where to start. What advice would you give them? I'll start with Ty and then go Sam and then Maximilian.
This is Ty. I mean, just to echo something Maximilian said earlier, like it's about community, and I think my advice is to not be alone in this work. There's so many powerful examples in the book, especially in the 4th chapter, Fighting for the Right to Teach, about how people build these incredible alliances. Like if we're talking about transgender justice in schools, we always have to be talking beyond the school walls, right? Whether you're, I mean, to start with, within the school walls, you might have a buddy down the hall, or you could perhaps have supportive administration. But I think the really powerful examples come when teachers are connecting with parents that they're allied with, organizations. So many great examples have already been mentioned on this call. And I think we'll have a second webinar with some of those organizations too. And I think, being open to those sort of unexpected allies, maybe they're hesitant, maybe they're slow to start, but even if it's a question, someone pulls you aside at the end of a PD or something, right? Like that's an opening, that's a relationship, and really leaning into not going about the work alone. If you wanted to, start a piece of curriculum, there's so many wonderful examples, like trying to find a person or two to bump those ideas around with, so that you feel support as you're trying to do this work.
This is Sam. Those are all great suggestions from Ty. If you want to do this work and you're unsure, if you're feeling underinformed, know that there's some authors that are very coherent and articulate, and you can learn a lot about experiences from reading. I know that when I'm trying to understand experiences, I don't want to overburden people by asking them many, many questions. And so reading has been one strategy that I've taken. And echoing what Ty said, don't limit yourself. Maybe you can think of transgender justice as just one of the threads that's pulling our community towards a reality of bodily autonomy and autonomy of identity. And trans justice is just one thread that's doing the pulling there. And that reveals to you many allies in the community that can help you in this journey.
That's Maximilian. For me, I would say I just want to go back to the point of talking directly to your students, because they know best, what their needs are. And again, I recommend everyone read the section 3 of the book, where we hear directly from trans students about where we can start. Some students talked about teachers when they're going to be out, making sure substitute teachers uh, know how to call the role or not call the role, or finding better ways to do that, rather than using a name that the student no longer uses. So little things like that can go a long way. So I want to encourage us to not underestimate the impact of little things like that. They can really go a very long way. I also think, to Sam's point, reading is there's just so much there. There's just so much knowledge that we can pull from. One of the books that I read, in my own journey, was a book called Safe is Not Enough, by Michael Sadowski. And it's a book about where the author talks about specific ways that we can incorporate LGBTQ plus justice in K through 12 schools, and he uses examples and just real life methods again that we can incorporate. And so I'm going to say reading and talking directly to students is a way that you can start. And to Todd's point, building community. I don't think you can ever go wrong with that. Collaborating with each other, and finding ways that we can do this work. And sometimes we might fail, but I think that's important of doing experiments, right? And figuring out where we went wrong and learning from those mistakes. So that's what I would say.
Right on. This is all so useful, and I know so many teachers are taking notes right now and improving their pedagogy and curriculum based on these suggestions, and that's exciting. Besides this incredible new book that I hope everyone will get and will read all of your brilliant chapters, I'd like to know about other resources that were helpful for you in teaching for transgender justice that you'd like to lift up for educators on the call today. So, um, Maximilian, if you want to start, and then we'll have Sam and then Ty.
This is Maximilian. Rethinking Schools, just the books, the articles, past issues of the publication has been helpful for me. It's been a great resource for me. Black Youth Project is a great resource as well. Writers and organizers are, sharing, stories and things that they're incorporating, as far as justice in their own communities. Um, I just encourage us to look into those resources because you're going to find something within those that you may not have known about before. And so yeah, I'll say that for now.
Hi, this is Sam. Folks at Rethinking Schools have already dropped a lot of great resources into the chat, including the gender inclusive biology website that I typically refer folks to if they teach science or are interested in science. But I wanna highlight a kind of timely topic. We just concluded the Olympic Games and we're heading into the Paralympic Games, and this might be the Olympic Games where trans issues have been most talked about. And I used to maybe not really see it as important. I didn't grow up playing sports, at least competitive sports, but I did recently find a sport that I think is one that I like, which is fencing. Very obscure, but I found that I really enjoy it. And there's a lot of misconceptions about why trans youth want to play sports. Should they? Um, Many of which kind of ignore this fact that I see this from an anthropological perspective. Every society that we know of has played some sort of sports or games. There is a social reason for this, and transgender people can't be just arbitrarily left out of that. So there's a documentary called Changing the Game. It seems to be available on Hulu. It was made a couple years ago before this Olympics, but it features the stories of trans athletes, and I think it changes the conversation on away from fairness and competition to inclusion in an effective way.
I love all of those suggestions. This is Ty. I think one thing that came to mind when Maximilian was just kind of grounding us in very basic practices again, which I so appreciate, like keep it concrete. just to give a shout out to my homeschool of McDaniel, when I arrived there, I was like so pleasantly surprised to see a basic practice of everyone's called by last name. The teachers, sometimes the students, if you don't know, what their preferred name is or whatever, but it was just so sweet as, someone coming into Sam already mentioned the schools are so gendered, right? There's so much Miss and Mr. And if you're non-binary, you're like, do I go by Mix or my last name? Or, what do I do? Where do I fit? And so just that very simple practice to me was like, oh, it's like breath of relief. And then, thinking about the connection to the Olympics that Sam made, that Algerian boxer Amin, who was sort of criticized for her gender presentation and accused of being trans. Like, I feel like it's such an important jumping off point as an example of where transphobia hurts everyone, right? Like, if there's this very limited definition of what is acceptable male and female, then everyone's going to be harmed. And there's some great exercises you can do in your classroom around that. Back when I was like a sex educator long ago, like, you'd make a little box on the board with male and female, and like, what are you called if you fall outside that expression, right? And often all of those words outside that box are going to be homophobic or transphobic words. So just a really great way for just people to make that connection around, how transphobia limits everyone. And then just the last resource is that, there's an organization, Pride at Work, and some unions are trying to be involved in this fight in a way of ensuring access to healthcare and ensuring contract protections for transgender teachers. So just another place to lean on if you're in a struggle at your school, either supporting a student or a teacher, to know that that's another resource.
Brilliant.
Yes, this is Sierra. Thank you so much for sharing all of those incredible resources. And on the theme of resources, I'm just looking at the Q&A box here, and Casey Cameron Chandler had a question about, are there networks of teachers or teacher prep faculty and programs that y'all would recommend linking in with? Because Casey Cameron Chandler, one of their challenges is that they're trying to tap into more national networks. They also work in a teacher prep program. So what connections do you see with teacher prep programs, with higher ed faculty? Maximilian, I know you work in that space too. So any suggestions that you might have for Casey, for Cameron Chandler, about ways to connect with national networks and then also with teacher prep programs? And anyone that wants to jump in or has a response or a thought, I'd welcome it.
This is Sam. One thing that comes to mind is the NEA, the National Education Association, has a sexual orientation and gender identity committee, as well as a LGBTQ caucus. And in recent years, aspiring educators have been largely making themselves represented in that group. So that might be a good group to connect with. And when it comes to LGBTQ teachers, the ones that I've seen completing teacher preparation programs in Colorado, some of their biggest concerns are, am I going to have a mentor teacher that supports me? Am I going to get matched with someone that it's going to even be helpful for me to learn from when it comes to teachers that are coming into the classrooms? They definitely need to know that they're going to be able to navigate their identity in their classroom. And we have very experienced teachers, some of whom have never really done that. So it's they're definitely in need of mentors in that aspect.
Just to offer one more resource, I was like, Maximilian, are you unmuting? Is the Trans Educator Network is like a Google group that's national. I know that's limited sometimes in how supported that feels for people, but pretty active like peer support group that I certainly leaned on when I was transitioning around like what can I expect from my administration, HR, and there's a lot of folks on there, working hard to support each other. So I can send a proper link out to that. Do you have anything else, Maximilian? I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's Maximilian. No, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I apologize.
No worries. We have a couple other questions. So I will ask one from Dr. Garrison, who says, can you offer some informal assignments / exercises to be used in the classroom?
So it sounds to me like you might be looking for maybe an informal or a one-time activity to introduce the idea of gender identity or transgender identity. And aside from getting to know your students, say from on the first days of school, getting to know their name that they want to be called, pronouns, and when to use them, I would start with what it is you're teaching, the content. The more integrated it is in the content, the more students are going to be reached by your teaching. There are some teachers in my school who will, um, and they're working on the way that they teach science, but some teachers in my school will tell me, "Oh, Sam, I'm teaching about gender inclusive biology on Wednesday." So just one day, really, uh, rather than thinking about where it comes up in the curriculum that already exists and what are students curious about.
Yes. Any other ideas on this one?
Well, again, I really support what Sam's saying of like integrating it into the content that you're teaching. But building on what he was saying about asking students, I do think providing students like, a note card at the beginning of the year or something where they can tell you those preferred pronouns more privately, and then they can, like he was alluding to, like really specify like, hey, don't use these with my parents. I just want these used at school, or kind of being explicit about the when and where of that name and pronoun that they'd like. Yeah, I used to do it as like sort of a circle, and just over the years have been seeing that, students maybe communicate more about their preferences one-on-one.
Thanks, Max. And I would just add to piggyback off of Sam, finding out what students are curious about and going from there. I think the more relevant we make it to their lives, the content is really going to resonate with them. And so that could maybe be in the form of a survey, or to piggyback off of Ty, finding a way to collect that information privately, and then incorporating it into your lesson plans. I think that goes a long way.
This is Sierra. Thank you. That's also helpful. We have one more question before we begin to close. And I would love to learn from you all, how can allies support, particularly in this moment where all of the anti-trans legislation is plaguing schools and communities? How can allies also offer their support so that we can defeat this legislation, so that we can resist, and so that we can win? And I'll pass that to whoever has any thoughts.
Hi, it's Max. I would start with just finding out if there are any organizing efforts in your local community and connecting with those organizers. And if there isn't, considering starting your own, and learning from organizing maybe that's being done in a neighboring community or a neighboring state, reaching out to them, sharing ideas, collaborating. I think that can go a long way in terms of fighting this opposition that we're seeing now. So yeah, I would start there, just doing some research around the organizing that's happening wherever you are.
Yeah, this is Ty, and just to add on to what Max was saying, like a lot of this backlash that we're seeing is, not necessarily even like locally led, right? It's like the Heritage Foundation or national organizations that are coming in and getting involved in these school board fights or getting involved in these, discussions around critical race theory, and just really remembering like that your relationships locally are much more powerful, and like trying to visibilize that. And like Maximilian said, if you're not involved, like really be building those relationships with your neighbors, with your school board candidates, so that you are positioned to be involved. And I think the other thing in terms of allies is just like the more that we are modeling like that talking about trans justice is not just like only for trans people or only about like medical issues or something, but that it's this broader, more expansive like sense of freedom and survival. Like the more that allies are doing that too, the less marginalized any of us are. So just be in the conversation and talking about it.
Another way that allies can have a great impact is try to find the moments or the areas where um, work can be exhausting for trans people. I know for me, it's exhausting to remind my staff group that we're also saying our pronouns for the 10th time this week. So to me, it's nice to have other people have that on their radar, even though it's a very small thing. A lot of folks in communities, they will forget about something, and unless they're reminded, as Ty said, that hey, this issue of transgender justice, uh, more is at stake than just transgender people. It's something that affects all of us. Sometimes people need this reminder from an ally.
I would also add the power of donating to your library. So finding books that you can donate that may not be there that queer, trans, and youth want to see. I think that goes a long way, lending libraries. So maybe reaching out to librarians and finding out where those gaps are and donating there because we know how powerful a book can be to a young person.
No doubt. What amazing conversation, y'all. I can't wait to see the impact of this book in schools all across the country and to see our movement for intersectional justice and trans justice just grow. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Yes, thank you so much. This is Sierra, and I'll just share that 3 words that are coming up for me as themes from this conversation: community, humanity, and intersectionality. So thank you all for lifting that and putting that at the forefront of our minds. And just to share a snippet from the book and a call to action, that transgender justice in schools is not a statement, it's a demand. And we demand that trans students and teachers be given the right to be their full and authentic selves, and a curriculum that includes LGBTQ plus resources. So please, please, please check out the book, share it with your union, share it with your colleagues, share it with your communities. You heard from the authors, one of the co-editors today, just the brilliance that is in this book, the student voices that are in this book, the educator voices that are in this book. So please, please, please grab a copy. And this is not a one-day lesson. This is an ongoing commitment. It's organizing, it's teaching, it's community, it's learning trans history, it's creating a more inclusive present while building a more liberatory future. Congratulations to all of you for this beautiful book. I'm going to just keep showing it because it's so fantastic. And thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you to Jesse for co-moderating, and thank you to Nikki and Christina for being our ASL interpreters. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Ty. Thank you, Maximilian. Thank you, Linda Christensen, our other co-editor on the book. And thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope to see you soon.